In this video, we will continue to talk about rendering in VRAY for 3ds Max. And we're gonna see in this video how to use some tools for interior rendering. So we divided the rendering into three main categories, which are exterior, interior, and object rendering. So in the previous video, we saw how we can set up an exterior rendering with different tools. And previously, we also saw how we can set up a simple render using simple objects. Like in this case, I use three objects: a car, a yacht, and an airplane, just to see how with the simple HDRI image or the IBL technique, image-based lighting technique, we can create interior and exterior rendering. So that was the simplest way we can create rendering, and then we move forward to see more tools for the exterior part. So in this video, we're going to concentrate on the interior, and we still can use previous tools. And before we actually move on, I just want to show you here the volumetric effect, which is an effect related to the environment fog, which we added also in the previous video. So by setting up the fog height and the fog distance, we can give a little bit more realism to our exterior scene, but we can use this also in interiors, and this is also going to create volumetric light. I'm going to show you what it's going to look like. So here you can see that by changing the fog distance, the most important parameter, I'm going to change the density of the fog. So also the color is really important because it's going to determine the transparency. And we do have also a transparency parameter. So the more I tend to white, the more it will be transparent. The more I go into black, the less fog I will have. And then I can also use colors here and do an emission with the fog. So it's going to be like an emissive fog. And you can play then with the scatter bounces if you want to increase a little bit the accuracy. And again, you can see I can work with the fog height. Now, the fog is an excellent tool to hide parts of your scene in order to make it more realistic. And again, this is something used in movies and TV series to hide parts of the set and to optimize, basically. So by hiding something in the background, you're gonna have a smaller scene, and you're gonna have also, you can see there the background is disappeared. So the VRAY sky there is no more visible. I can only see the fog, and this is gonna help me to optimize so I can create smaller scenes which are gonna be faster to render, easier to render. So this is one way we can use the fog. So by adding this kind of mist. Now I'm gonna lock the perspective here so that I can work also in other views, and I can try also some other effects. So I'm gonna add now some lights to, so this is the daylight which we used in the previous video. So it was a combination of sun and sky. So if I drop the daylight system down the horizon, I'm gonna get a night scene, because we said that sun and sky system through the daylight are gonna behave just like in reality. So this is a night scene because I've placed my sun and my sky in a night hour. So I'm also gonna add here a simple target spot light. So I'm not even using a VRAY light, but I can see the volumetric effect right away. So by volumetric means that it will be like the light is gonna be more visible, and it's gonna be volumetric, so it's gonna have a volume, it's gonna be there in the scene. And this is something that happens in reality when we have fog or mist. We can see the light as a more visible beam. So you can play around with the environment fog, and you can get these nice effects, nice volumetric effects. Now, I always suggest you use the, not the standard lights, but the VRAY light, because they're probably gonna work better when you use VRAY render. So this is just to test a little bit of these different tools and lights that we find in 3ds Max. Now I want to copy this, but you can see that the target stays there when I copy the light. So if you want, you can also deactivate the target. But in this case, it's just to make an example here. I just want to show you. There we go. This is a disk, VRAY Light disk that we used previously to create some spotlight. You can see there the volumetric effect is starting to appear. Now this is a really long effect to render, so you need to have some patience there, run the render and just wait. And I'm also using the VRAY camera, so I'm also gonna adjust in this video the exposure. We're gonna see how we can work with cameras and adjust the brightness and the exposure of the scene. And there you go. Now this is the denoiser kicking in. We also talked about the denoiser in the previous video, so how we can get rid of the noise. And when you're using environment fog and volumetric effect, you're gonna have a lot of noise, and that's why it's gonna take a lot of time to render. Now you can use the same effect also in interiors. We're gonna make an example here also in the interior. So if I switch from external to interior and I run a render here, the light is gonna come in the window and it's gonna create also here a volumetric effect. So you can see there, the light is getting in and it's creating that beam of light coming inside the interior. And again, it's gonna take a long time. So just to show you that you can use this in interior and exterior. And we can adjust here the exposure by going into display correction and adjusting the simple exposure right there. So this is another way we can fix the exposure of a render, whether we are in interior or exterior. And this is Lightmix, another render element that is really useful. I'm just gonna give you a quick demonstration of how you can use it. So without re-rendering everything, you can just manage all the different lights that you have inserted in your scene. So you can see here I have all the light, the rest of the light, which in this case is just my exterior spotlight, and then I have self-illumination, which is coming from the fog, the environment, which is coming from the outside, but it's really low right now because we are in a night scene, and then we have this VRAY light we can isolate, we can adjust. So Lightmix, it's really handy because we can isolate each single light, we can see the effect, we can also change the color of that effect. The only thing we cannot do is move the lights around. That's something you can do only with the interactive rendering. But with the Lightmix, we can really play with different lights and change radically the scenario or the overall effect of our lighting. So we talked in various lessons about artificial lights, natural lights, and so on. Now here you can just manage those in terms of intensity and color without re-rendering every time. So this is just a post-production effect, like the denoise. It's something that is gonna come after the render. So you can just stop the render and play around with the lights. And you can then also transfer all this information into the scene, into the lights in the scene. You have many tools in the Lightmix, but we're gonna get back to the Lightmix later. So I'm just gonna wanted to do a quick demonstration. So if I turn up the sunlight again and place it really high, I'm gonna have a day scene. So sometimes you need to re-render, and there, what's going on here, I just need to adjust the exposure. So every time you change quantity of light in your scene, you need to adjust the exposure. Now this is simple exposure, but we're also gonna see some more advanced exposure, which is going through the camera. So through the camera we can have more realistic parameters, more physical parameters, and we're gonna see that. So in the environment tab in 3ds Max, we find different effects like the VRAY environment fog. We find the exposure controls, but you can choose then if you want to use the 3ds Max tools or the VRAY tools. Doesn't matter. All that matters is that you get where you want to go. And again, now I am in the outside here, and you can see I have Also, I can play around with the sun, which is gonna be pretty visible light, and that's my VRAY light, which I turned blue. And self-illumination, environment, the spotlights that I place outside. So you can turn on and off lights and really switch from day to night in a matter of seconds. So if you are interested in volumetric light effects, you can just search it in Google and see how many effects you can create. Now let's move on, and I'm gonna talk about the camera exposure or camera settings. Now these are the main settings of a real camera in real life. ISO, f-stops, and shutter. These are the shutter speed. These are the most important values that you need to set up in reality and also here in 3ds Max, because what we are doing is just simulating what happens in reality when we use cameras. And essentially we need to decide how much light we want to get in our camera. The more lights I have, the more bright the picture will be. So when I change, for example, the f-stop, I can open or close the aperture of my shutter. So the more open it is, the more light will come in and the more bright the picture will be. And I will also have more depth of field. Now the depth of field, which is also called DOF, it's an effect related to the f-stops. So related to the aperture of the shutter. The motion blur, another camera effect, it's related to the shutter speed. So the faster is the shutter speed, the less light I have inside, and the less also motion blur effect I will have. The slower will be the shutter speed, and the more I will have this motion blur effect. So when things are kind of, leave this ghosting around, these are lights that have been captured really slow, so they leave this ghosting behind. So this is how roughly how these effects works, and you can create them here in VRAY for 3ds Max, just setting up these realistic parameters that you usually find also in real life cameras. Now I have this scene here that I have created in the 3ds Max course, and it consists in many different things like animation, lights, and so on. So I'm gonna switch from Arnold to VRAY render, and the first time you do that, make sure that you try to convert as much as you can. So you can see there we have animation. Now we can work with any animation that we developed in 3ds Max. I'm gonna get rid of something here, something that I don't really need, so some particles there that will fall in from the sky, and maybe I need to adjust something, but we're gonna see something together that can help you to set up a nice exterior rendering. And we have a pool there with a noise bump effect, procedural noise, which is useful when you need to create that swimming pool effect. We also have some displacement on the roof and on the walls. Also, Arnold comes with the displacement as well. So we do have displacement also in standard 3ds Max. Now let's run a render and let's see what's happening here. Now that's the noise, how it's gonna appear on our reflective surface. Is gonna give that water-like effect. Maybe it's too noisy. And then we have also other effects here. And all the materials are visible except for some metals there that appear black, so I can adjust them. So try always to convert with the scene converter, try to convert everything to VRAY. You can see these are our Arnold lights, these are not VRAY lights, so they will not work properly using VRAY. So what you can do there is just try to, well, you can see they are pretty similar to VRAY light. Once you understand one render engine, you can work also with the others. They have similar settings, similar parameters. But these are not VRAY lights, so I either change them or just get rid of those. So I can go there, isolate the lights, and just select all the Arnold lights that are in the scene and just get rid of them. Also because we want to create our own lighting in this scene. So I'm just using right now the sun and the sky. and the rest is just physical materials, I believe. So most of them will be correctly displayed. And you can see there, I'm gonna adjust the exposure right away. So simple exposure is pretty fast to set up, and you can definitely do that before you even go into cameras. So let's create a daylight system right away, and let's add also photographic exposure, and let's modify it as we already know how to do. So I'm gonna create a daylight, click and drag, insert the sky and the sun, change here the VRAY sun in the sunlight, and add a VRAY sky and deactivate the skylight. So everything we did previously for the exterior can be done also for interior, because you can illuminate an interior using an external natural light, and then you can add other artificial lights later. Again, I'm gonna adjust the exposure, and you can already see that this looks better than before. So we can see a nice sunlight coming from above. Also, the swimming pool looks better. So again, just make sure that materials work fine. Otherwise, try to convert them automatically or manually, just as we did previously. So I'm gonna use the material picker. I'm gonna pick that metal there that is not, yeah, you can see it's showing up black because this is actually a standard material. This is not a physical material. So I'm gonna change it into a nice metal from the VRAY libraries right away. And this is one quick way we can just fix this issue. So make sure that any material looks black. It means that it's an issue that you need to solve. So I'm gonna just substitute this by clicking and dragging the sphere in the multi-material, multi-sub-object material, which is a 3ds Max material that you can use for windows and doors that you find in 3ds Max. Now also need a glass here for the panel, so I'm gonna use a simple glass, maybe, well, something, just going for a clear glass. Click and drag, drop it right there, and this should have solved the problems there for the window. So I'm gonna apply it, and then I will see if everything works fine. And also that railing there needs metal, so I added the metal also onto that railing. And again, you know, it's just a matter of fixing things. If you have a scene coming from another render engine, it's just a matter of fixing. Otherwise, you just start from zero if you are working directly in VRAY. Now I want to run another interactive rendering here, and I want to move around my sun, and I want the sun to get in the interior of that building. So by doing that, I can illuminate the interior without even using artificial lights. So I want to have a nice effect of this sun coming into the interior, and I can do it. I can fix it here, and then I can move in an interior view later. You can see that the more I go down, the more the sunlight becomes yellowish and orange, more than bluish. And there you go. I can see there that it's getting inside thanks to the glass that I have applied to those panels on the window. Okay, now let's see something else here. Let's see if everything goes okay. I think it's pretty okay. And we also have some physical cameras, which I'm going to delete because those are physical cameras. I want to add VRAY physical cameras. And I have also some extra objects there, which I probably will not use, which are animated objects. I want to get rid of those. Just get rid of everything it's not useful for your scene and for your frame. Anything that goes outside the frame or anything you don't need, you just need to get rid of that. Especially if you do animation, try to keep the scene as low poly as you can, as low polygon as you can. And we have also some people here, but these are looking fine, so I will keep the people, which I created with a populate, and create a VRAY physical camera as we saw also in the previous video. But this time I'm gonna create it from the top view, not from the perspective view, and I'm gonna adjust it in terms of height. So I'm gonna change the height of the point of view and also change the perspective to be inside the VRAY camera. So right now I am inside the VRAY camera. I can adjust it from the perspective view, or I can adjust it from the top view or the side view. And let's run a render. Now you can see the exposure has changed. So right now I don't want to use the simple exposure, but I'm gonna work with the camera exposure. So things are gonna be a little more complex, a little more complicated, but definitely looking better. So I'm gonna adjust here and say that I want to use V-Ray exposure control, not physical exposure of 3ds Max, and I want to change there the V-Ray settings. I want to use my camera, so I can use here the photographic. So I do have also here shutter speed, ISO, f number, so I do have those parameters there, but I want to use those from the camera, not generic. So I want to use the camera to set up also all these values here. So I'm gonna go inside the camera and adjust those parameters. Now again, I changed the view and I changed also the image that has been rendered. So I always need to lock the view there. So I'm gonna go to render setup, lock the view, and then I'm ready to go. So I'm gonna keep now my attention, keep my focus on this perspective. And I'm gonna go in the modify tab of my V-Ray physical camera, and there you go. This is where you find ISO, f number, and shutter speed. So if I drop down the ISO, you can see there I'm dropping down the exposure or the brightness of the scene. So you need to balance ISO, f number, and shutter speed. Now, if you want to work with depth of field, you're gonna use f number. For the motion blur, you're gonna use shutter speed. Now you can see I slow down the shutter speed and I have more light coming in the camera, as I said before. If I increase the speed of the shutter, less light is gonna be captured by the camera. And the f number, it's kind of the same. So if I decrease the f number, I'm gonna have a larger aperture, so I'm gonna have more light and more depth of field. If I increase the number, I'm gonna have the opposite. So you just need to balance everything. Now f number 2 will be good to have a depth of field, but we're gonna see that later when we're gonna move into the interior. We are still in the exterior part, so I just wanna stay here just to show you here another tool that we already saw before, the V-Ray Clipper. I want to show you how it works beautifully when you have a building that has actual walls and windows and doors and so on. So if I go there and place the V-Ray Clipper right there, it's gonna clip out everything that's gonna be below. So I'm gonna run an interactive rendering just to show you how it's gonna look like. And there you go. You can see it's cutting out everything that's above that, and it's leaving what's below. So you can also rotate the clipper just as any other plane to cut. In this case, I'm creating a plan view, but if I rotate it 90 degrees, I can create a section. And the color there, well, the exposure is too high, so I need to fix the exposure as well. But also the color, I can fix the color, or I can set the material to be the object material if I want. But in most cases, it's better to use a color here to have that more visible. And sometimes you need to re-render to see the actual change of the color. You can see there. I'm using this other view. So you can create perspective section of your building, which is again really helpful for architects. And I have a problem here with that glass. You can see it's kind of showing me everything like it was a too thick piece of glass. So I need to fix the glass as well. So you can see that you have a lot of things to know and you have a lot of things to fix. So you can see there the glass it's looking like a big block of glass in the interior there. That's not good. I need to understand why it's doing that. And that's probably due to the material that I'm using, and in most cases, to fix this problem, we already mentioned this before, you can use this parameter here, which is called thin wall. So in this case, probably I don't need thin wall. So I'm just gonna deactivate it. So sometimes you need to turn them on, sometimes off, depending how it's gonna look. So that could fix the problem. Let's see what's gonna happen here. And no, the problem is still there. You can see that it's not an issue concerning the thin wall. Well, usually thin wall would solve the problem actually. So I would rather keep thin wall on than off. So let's see what is the issue here. And I believe it could be the smoothing groups, because when you can see I've added a chamfer here to give more details to the windows, but by adding a chamfer, you can see there is a smooth effect applied. So I definitely don't want that smooth effect on my glass, otherwise it's gonna look like a rounded glass, like a spherical glass, and that's gonna change the effect of the reflections and of the refractions. So definitely I want everything straight here. So be careful to have the smoothing set up correctly. Smoothing groups and all these other parameters here, you will find it in the 3ds Max video course. So how to create soft geometry or hard geometry. In this case, we want hard geometry. So I want tension 0, I want quad. I don't want anything to be rounded or soft. Everything needs to be straight when I need to use glass. Otherwise, it's gonna give me that strange look, kind of a glass sphere. And also here, I have some issue with this window. It's too small, so it's too big, so I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller in order to be placed perfectly on that wall opening right there. Okay, and then you can open and close. All right, now let's see if we adjusted this issue. Let's run a render. And again, this could be one of the many issues that you can find. And you can see there now it looks definitely way better. It's probably the way it's supposed to look. So if you cannot solve your issue, you can also contact us for assistance. We try to help you. And let's go back now to our cameras. And I want to create another camera in the interior. So I'm gonna click and drag and use another camera. Now remember that if you want to have straight vertical lines, you need to have the point of view and the target at the same height. Otherwise, it's going to change the perspective, and it's not gonna make vertical straight lines. Everything will be oblique, and this is not used in architecture. Usually we want to see the straight vertical lines. So in the target there of the camera, I'm gonna set up the same exact height of the camera. And then I can move into this camera and see what's going on. And I am behind a wall, so be careful not to place the camera in the wrong position, otherwise you're gonna see everything black or you won't see anything at all. And there it is. So I'm just gonna adjust the field of view first, so the focal length, because in interior we're probably gonna use a wider angle and not a telescopic lens, because we want to capture more surrounding and we don't have enough space, so we use wider lenses that are gonna give us some wide look. And if I do a render here, you can already see that my interiors are lightened up already. They're just too dark. Even my natural light is coming in from the sun and the sky outside. This is because you always need to adjust the exposure when you are switching from exterior to interior. So let's go back to environment here. I'm gonna click and drag the sun and sky, sorry, the V-Ray sky here. And you can see there that I have a sound light. If it's not detected there, you can click and assign the sunlight from the scene. So make sure that the sunlight is connected to the V-Ray sky. So I'm gonna click and drag and place it into that tag, and probably need to increase the intensity of the sun in the sky or change the exposure. Now I can also change the ground albedo and other settings here in the V-Ray sky. So I can make this a night scene or a day scene, and here I want to have kind of a sea, an ocean in front of my apartment. And you can also change turbidity, ozone. These are kind of fog effect, and you can also blur a little bit the horizon line that you see. So I'm just gonna try different colors here until I get some nice bluish tint that represent a sea or an ocean. And you can change also sky models there. Okay, so I duplicated my scene so that I can have also another piece of architecture there, because I didn't like everything to be totally flat, and so I've added some more geometry there. I'm also gonna add some more models later, some vegetation from Chaos Cosmos. Well, actually, let's start to bring some more vegetation right away. So just as we did for the exterior rendering, also here we can improve our rendering with many details and many assets and props to make it look more realistic. So I've added some trees and vegetation. Now I do have clipping planes. If my scene is too big and I want to cut out things that I don't need, I can use it. I can use the clipping planes in the camera. Okay, so I'm taking care of what I'm going to see here in this rendering. So also there in the other window, I don't want to see the sea, but I'm gonna add some trees just to make it look better and more realistic. Now let's get back to the render settings. Now here you can adjust the resolution in the common. Here we can adjust also things, really interesting things. So when we use image sampler and progressive image sampler, we saw that we can define this by using subdivisions and noise threshold and so on. So yeah, we have also camera here, and we have auto exposure. So this is gonna figure out the exposure automatically, and the auto white balance as well. You can also change the type of camera. So this is kind of a generic camera that you can use anytime, and it has also the motion blur and the depth of field. But in this case, we are using the camera, and you can also use the depth of field and the focus, but we're gonna see that directly on the camera. Now what I want to do is also change Irradiance map and light cache. This is a good setting for interiors. And then I can adjust also here contrast, saturation. And here in the Irradiance map, I have additional settings for the quality. I can also have presets. So I can set up here high quality right away or low quality, depending if I want to do like a draft for my render, or if I want to go for the final render, I can increase those subdivisions and interpolation samples. So just use these presets and see what they change, what they are changing. That's gonna give you an idea of how you can create higher or lower quality renderings. And also you can change here from single frame to animation if you want to do an animation. And then remember that you need to set up the animation in 3ds Max, as you already know if you do know 3ds Max. Otherwise, I suggest you give a look also to the 3ds Max video course. Now I'm gonna keep here in the light cache also the preset for the still image, not animation, and you have also here subdivision. If you increase subdivisions, you're gonna have more quality. If you decrease the sample size, it's like working with a noise threshold. So smaller sample size will result in more accurate render, but also in longer renderings. So again, it's your choice. Now you can also load a pre-calculated light cache from a file. So especially if you do like animation, this is gonna help to save some time. And then again, you have caustics, so complex refraction. And let's go directly to render elements. And of course, I suggest you add here the denoiser as we did before. It's always good to have the denoiser effect applied, and then we can use it later. And definitely also the light mix, so you can manage all the lights as we saw before. And well, just decide if you need some of these render elements in post-production. Remember that a lot of work can be done in post-production, and it will be less heavy than do it in VRAY for 3ds Max. So a lot of things you can do it directly in post-production. You can adjust a lot, you can fix a lot. So just if you want, play around here with render elements, see what you can do with those. You can also add all the render elements and then go one by one. Now make sure that these are enabled. Well, in case of the Lightmix, I think it doesn't need to be enabled. You can see there it's gonna like do it automatically, so it's sending this message here. And let's just close, and that's it for the render settings right now. Maybe we will get back later to those. Now always change, make some tests, save it in the history, see what works better in terms of performance, quality, and speed. You need to find, again, the balance according to your machine. Okay, so you can see we still need to fix this darkness inside my interior, and we're gonna address that. So let's stop now the render. I just want to show you that now the denoiser will be available, and here's the light mix right there. So to activate the light mix, you need to go there and switch from source RGB to source light mix. And in the display correction, we can already work with the exposure, simple exposure, or we can go in the more complex exposure through the camera, and that's what we're gonna do here. Okay, now I just want to add some more lights for the interiors. Probably I'm gonna add some IS lights, some spotlights for the interiors. So you can add all the different lights that we saw. They're gonna help you to create that interior lighting. But I also want to show you another technique, which is called a portal light. So the portal, it's supposed to be a light that is gonna help the light getting inside your scene. And you can use a plain light for this, and it needs to be invisible. You cannot see it because you're gonna place it just outside a window. And so make sure also that it's not visible in reflections and in specular. So I'm gonna turn on auto grid so that I can place a rectangle light directly near that big window right there. So I'm gonna click and drag, and that's my first portal light. Then it's going to help me to bring in some external light. So it's a fake light, we can say it. It's not a real life light that you can find in real life, but it's sold for a rendering purpose. So it's just to brighten up the scene a little bit without using artificial lights yet. And I'm also gonna add another portal light right there. And usually these portal lights should have the color of the sky. So if the sky is orange, you are in a sunset, you want to set that to orange. If you are in a midday scene, that's gonna be like more bluish. If you are in a night scene, you probably want to turn them off or just dim them really down, unless you want to have like a moonlight effect. So let's render again, and you can see now we definitely have more brightness. Without adjusting the exposure yet, we boost the interior lighting. And again, I want to turn off the specular and reflections, otherwise it's going to be reflected on some objects, and I don't want that. Same goes for this other one here. I'm going to make it invisible and turn off affect specular and also reflections. You can see the partial light reflected in the other window right there. So that's not good because this is a fake effect. You don't want to see it. This is just for diffuse illumination. We don't need it for specularity or reflections. You can see there it's showing reflected. So turn off reflections. And now it's gonna look okay. Well, no, I still need to turn off the reflections on the other partial light. So, and I'm gonna also give it a bluish tint. I can also use a map. I can use also the HDRI of an exterior to have a nice lighting. So not a uniform, but I can use a gradient. I can use some procedural map. I can use VRAY sky. I can use whatever I want, just as we saw with the projector. Now I always change a little bit the light, so I want to have this more like pink and the other one more blue. So it's like the 3-point lighting technique. I try to have add variety so that the effect is gonna be more three-dimensional. And also you can see those bricks there with the displacement are starting to really come out. So you know, materials help lights to be more realistic. Lights help materials to be more realistic. So everything goes together, material, lights, render settings. And now I can adjust also a little bit the simple exposure. And there you go. Now I am lighting up my scene, my interior scene, only with natural lights, only with natural effects. And I'm also gonna turn off the reflections right there. So they're gonna disappear and look better. And so let's stop and okay, there you go. It went away. You can see now it looks better. So again, we can work with simple exposure. We can work with photographic exposure using VRAY camera, and we're gonna get there. This is just gonna be a longer lesson because we have a lot of things to cover, but I want to keep everything together so that you have a full picture. So that's my camera there, and I want to create a copy by moving and holding shift, and this is going to be the camera for the depth of field or DOF. So this is when we are gonna use also the photographic exposure. Now I want to isolate the camera there and select the target and place it on the statue that is placed on the table. So I'm gonna switch from the previous camera to the DOF camera, and there you go. This is my statue on the table that I want to focus on, and I want to leave the other things out of focus, and perhaps also do the opposite. So we're gonna do everything little by little. So let's press play and see what's gonna look like here. And there you go. So I have this statue here. It looks out of focus actually. So we need to understand where the focus is and if the focus is on the target or somewhere else. So let's stop this and let's see here. You can see the camera there. Okay, the focus it's on the statue, so that's good. So that's my camera. Let's see now. Well, I want to do this really dramatic, so I want to decrease the F number more, so I'm gonna have more light and more depth of field. So this is too bright right now. I'm gonna use a region just to balance the lighting, and I'm gonna drop down the ISO or work with the shutter speed, one or the other. So if I increase the shutter speed, I'm gonna have less light. And if I'm gonna decrease the ISO, I'm gonna have less light. Okay, so maybe 1.5 is good for F number, but you can find also the values on the web when you want to set up the F number. So you can help yourself with other sources. And shutter speed, I want to lower that down. And let's activate now the depth of field and also the motion blur. So it's looking blurred, but I think I need to just wait for the render to render everything. And you also have bokeh effect, which is an effect related to the depth of field. Now we can see there in the background, we can start to see some depth of field, but as usual, we need to wait. Okay, so I just went a little bit forward, and you can see there the statue is definitely in focus and the background there is out of focus. So this is what is the depth of field is doing to my picture, and it's gonna look way more realistic than standard image. Now you can see the depth of field can be set to the target, can be specified with a focus distance. So if I say 100, it's still gonna be good there. And I'm also gonna use bokeh effect. I'm gonna show you quickly what bokeh effect is. It's gonna turn everything which is blurred into circles, especially lights and emissive objects and reflection of lights. They're gonna be turned into circles or hexagons, depending on how many blades you set. Okay, now let's see some motion blur. So if I go here in the outside, I have some moving people which were created with the populate tool in 3ds Max, and these are good enough to have that motion blur effect. So you can move the camera to have motion blur effect, or you can move an object, or in this case people, to have the motion blur. Something needs to be moving, otherwise you won't have that effect. So this is another camera which I placed in the exterior, and remember that you need a slow shutter speed if you want to have the motion blur. So right now you can see that it's pretty visible because I have set the shutter speed to 1, and so it's really slow, and so the person there practically disappeared. So this is too high. I need to fix it. I need to make it more balanced. So remember first to turn on motion blur and then do some tests. And now you can see there, this is a more mild effect. So I can still see the person there. I can perceive that it's moving, but it's not so blurred. I can see it's a more balanced result. So the scene now is too dark, so I need to fix it again, either by decreasing the F number or by increasing the ISO. But that's it. And this is also with the denoiser applied. Now denoiser will eat a little bit of these effects. It's gonna delete some of the details. So sometimes these two don't work together okay. So make sure that everything looks fine when you use motion blur, depth of field, and denoiser. So here I'm using both, and so I will see later the effects. And also I can add many more post-production layers here. We're gonna talk about this later. So see you in the next lesson.